At some point, most of us have probably had a crush on someone who did not return the feeling. And then we felt rejected, we felt disappointed, we felt sad. Maybe that was a crush you had in kindergarten, or maybe you're living that right now. Or maybe it's not about a specific person, but maybe you feel that way about dating in general. Now, that may not be true of everybody in the room, and that's okay, but maybe for some of you, it feels like it's easy for anybody to date except you. Or maybe you feel like everybody cares about getting a date, and you just aren't that interested in dating right now, or maybe ever. Whether you're choosing to be dateless or not, sometimes being on the outside of dating culture can feel really lonely. There are so many emotions that come with the letdown of not dating and wanting to or getting turned down by somebody. Nothing about that is easy. Now, in this series, we're going to talk about dating, right? And that idea that we have that finding the one, maybe not the forever one, but the one we want to be with, somehow dating just feels like a big deal, right? Why does dating feel like such a big deal? It's because the idea of being more than friends brings lots of emotions and feelings with it. And feelings are powerful and they can mess with our perspective and they can be overwhelming. In fact, King Solomon, one of the most famous kings of Israel, wrote something that speaks to just that in the book of Proverbs. Solomon says this: "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." That's Proverbs 17, verse 22. In other words, a sense of joy is a cure and medicine to feeling down. He didn't say that the answer to having complicated, hurt, disappointed feelings is found in perfect life circumstances and getting what you want, including a relationship. The second half of the verse goes on to say, "A crushed spirit dries up your bones." A broken spirit will weaken you and wear you out. And it's more than having a bad day or feeling bummed. A crushed spirit is letting a bad day or week become a way of life. The word crushed captures it perfectly. It refers to feeling weighed down by the unhappiness because of life circumstances. It's seeing all life through your difficulty and allowing your perspective to be controlled by what isn't going well. But whether you feel cheerful or you feel crushed, I think what Solomon is saying is this: how you feel on the inside never stays on the inside. Eventually, it will seep into the rest of your life. Now, chances are some of you can relate to that. Some of you have noticed that your dating life or your lack of one is affecting the way that you feel about everything. And you wish that you had a cheerful heart, like Solomon says, but how? Actually, a lot of the writers who contributed to the Bible seem to think that there's a part that we can play when it comes to choosing a cheerful heart. Over and over, in different times, different places, different circumstances, the writers of Scripture say things like rejoice or be glad, be of good cheer. And I imagine that their original audience thought things like you and I think. They probably wondered, like, is that even possible? How does someone actually change how they feel when they're experiencing hard times in life, right? How do we adjust how we feel? One of the times we see this is in a letter from the Apostle Paul to the church at Philippi. Paul was one of the influential leaders in the history of the Christian church, and he wrote letters to the churches. And he started, and one of those letters is a book called Philippians. And towards the end of the letter, Paul says this: "Rejoice in the Lord always." And I'll say it again, rejoice. Philippians 4, verse 4. Another translation of that says to always be full of joy. Now, before you start thinking that this is just something you should find in a Christian greeting card, you need to know what life was like for people in Philippi when Paul wrote that letter. For Christians around that time in history, being full of joy was not easy. They were facing persecution, danger, and the potential of being harmed or even killed simply because they believed in and followed the ways of Jesus. But Paul calls them to rejoice. And then he continues by reminding the readers of some things that they can do to make that happen. He talks about treating people well, prayer, being grateful for all the good things that those people had. Then he says something that I think could be a game changer for you, especially if dating or anything else has bummed you out. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. Philippians 4:8. Basically, Paul is saying that what you think about matters. Having a cheerful heart and not a crushed spirit are both connected to what we think about. They're not affected by our outward circumstances, like whether we're dating or not dating. Our feelings follow our thoughts. Now, I realize that comparing rejection or difficulty with dating to first century danger and persecution is a bit of a stretch, right? But here's why I think all this connects to what you and I feel today. We all face circumstances and hardships that can take all of our attention. Challenging events like a breakup, a crush who chooses someone else, or just the way dating can consume everyone's attention when you aren't interested can take up all of our time and energy, and it can completely change our mood. And that's understandable because it can feel like being crushed, like Solomon said. That's why it's important to point out what Paul isn't saying. He isn't saying ignore your feelings or that the disappointment of rejection is nothing compared to what early Christians went through. Paul isn't saying just suck it up. No one is trying to talk you out of the fact that it feels really difficult at the time. What Paul is saying is that no matter what kind of difficulty you're going through, the feelings you have don't have to be your whole world. Now that's good news because it means that we have a lot more control than we think. It doesn't mean that our circumstances or experiences don't bother us, but we do have the power to decide that it's not the only thing we're going to think about. We have the power to choose what we think about. We don't have to let things that disappoint us or frustrate us dominate our thoughts. A bad minute doesn't have to turn into a bad mood or a bad day or a bad week or what feels like a bad life. Just because one part of your life makes you unhappy, even if it's an important part, does not mean that the rest of your life is bad. Paul is telling us to make a shift in how we think. Why? Well, because when we don't change the way we think, we lose our perspective. And a loss of perspective takes away our power and gives it to our circumstances. And before we know it, our circumstances will crush our spirit. Now, when we say perspective, what we mean is this. Perspective is how you see a situation. A lost perspective means we take what feels bad right now in one part of our life and we make it the way we see everything all the time. The amazing thing is perspective doesn't just happen. You get to choose it. Feelings and emotions that have a way of coloring how we experience life, right? You may wake up one day feeling sad or angry, so your day starts off and it kind of goes that direction. Or maybe you're going through your day and something amazing is going to happen tomorrow and you remember, and that makes you excited the rest of the day. Feelings have a way of just showing up. However, there is a better way to live. Feelings are good and they're natural, but they don't have to control our life. As your feelings show up, you decide the impact they'll have on your day. You decide where to put your focus. The point is, every day you get to pick your perspective. You don't have to allow feelings to be in control of how you experience life. In other words, you pick your perspective. The choice is yours. Now, it's okay to want to date. It's okay to be frustrated by dating. It's okay to not want to date and to feel separate from those that do. But it doesn't have to be the main thing you focus on. When it feels like it's the thing that determines your perspective, it's time to step back and it's time to pick a new perspective. Now, that does not mean that you're going to suddenly feel different, but it does mean that you can decide to control what you can, and your attention, your focus, and your view of the situation is in your control. The truth is, no circumstance, dating or otherwise, is going to give you the cheerful heart that you want. You're also not stuck with a crushed spirit just because things didn't go the way you wanted in your dating. You can change your attitude. You can focus on something more important because there is so much happening in your life. There is so much more going on in your world. Sometimes it just takes a little effort to remind ourselves of that. So let's practice for a second. Let's go back to what Paul wrote and we'll take some cues from him, okay? You don't have to answer out loud, but in your mind, I want you to answer a few of these questions. What negative thing has my full attention right now? How do I feel about it? Why is it important to me? Now, before we move forward, I want to remind you that it is important to feel your feelings, all of them, even the ones that aren't fun to feel. Here's the good news. Being able to name your not so fun feelings allows you to see that difficult things and joyful things can exist at the same time. Yes, you might have all sorts of feelings around that negative circumstance that has your focus, but there's more to life than just that. Like the church in Philippi, you can go through difficult things and still have joy. You can be disappointed in how dating is going, but still pay attention to other areas of your life, especially the ones that are good. In fact, I want to show you what I mean, but I want to ask you a few more questions. But before doing that, let me remind you of something. No matter what your dating status is or what you want it to be, you are a whole person, just the way you are. You're not missing any pieces. You're not incomplete. You're not less than or lacking. You're not just killing time waiting for the right person to come along. You are enough just the way you are. And when you pick that perspective to start from, no matter what your dating reality is, you are far less likely to live with a crushed spirit. Now, to help kickstart the process of picking a better perspective, let me ask you a few more questions. What is something going on really well in your life right now? Who is someone you're grateful for? What's a talent that you're glad that you have? What's something you're proud of yourself for? And what's something God has done that makes you feel thankful? Now, chances are you can't answer all those questions right now, but I'll bet one or two answers at least came to mind, right? Some really good things are happening in your world right now. And in the words of the Apostle Paul, think about those things. Let your mind stay there, right? It doesn't mean that you ignore difficult things or challenges with your dating or whatever. It's just not your whole focus. As your focus changes, you may just find yourself feeling better about your dating scene because you keep it in a proper perspective, right? What would your life look like if you were living with a hopeful perspective even when you don't feel that way? Now, this is bigger than dating. There are all sorts of things through life that may tempt you to stay frustrated and angry, but when things are not necessarily going the way you want, I want you to know that you have more power than you think you do. Your dating circumstances and your life circumstances might change through school. You can't control that, but you can control how you respond. You pick your perspective. Take it from Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived. Your heart is too important to leave it in a broken place. But a simple change in where you focus can make all the difference in the world.